with the extra point. This is Erik McKinney, joined by Darrell Rideaux. Darrell, it's been a couple games where we've seen the ball coming out of Kedon Slovis's hand in a way that we are not used to seeing based on what he did in 2019. There were a few against Arizona State, a lot more against Arizona. I'm curious your take on what's going on. And before you get into it, we've heard kind of three explanations. Kedon Slovis, right after the game, was asked if it was an injury. He said absolutely not, dismissed that immediately. He brought up maybe it's mechanical. Graham Harrell jumps in. He says absolutely that it has nothing to do with mechanics. He throws the idea that maybe the ball slipped on him and then it got to be a mental issue for Kedon Slovis. Clay Helton has now 3 times blamed sort of a slick ball, dry weather, windy out in Arizona, and just the ball slipping on Kedon Slovis. So a lot of explanation. The explanations feel a little bit like some of the passes, kind of wobbly and inconsistent in what you're hearing. Your take on what's going on, what we saw in terms of those passes from Kedon Slovis against Arizona.
Look, if you're going to embellish the truth, at least all be on the same page and stick to the same narrative, because it is hard pressed for one to watch a game. Maybe you give them the benefit of the doubt against Arizona State. Again, the weather wasn't favorable. It rained. You can attribute, a wobbly ball to weather conditions. But in the desert, I've never known for weather to travel with the team when you're in the dry desert. And those conditions were very favorable. There's really no excuse. So could it be an injury that perhaps they don't want to acknowledge? Again, if you want to give Kedon Slovis benefit of the doubt, I have no reason not to believe him. But when it comes to the eyeball test, there's something not right about when that ball leaves his hands in the delivery, whether it is mechanics and it's something that he needs to work through. Again, this is the kid who wasn't highly recruited, but came in and impressed you with his confidence, his poise. This is somebody who worked on a ton of mechanics with the likes of a Kurt Warner. So it's hard for me to believe that all of a sudden you forgot about your mechanics after, you came in here and you won the job because of your accuracy. Now, again, I'm not saying that he had the strongest arm in the world, but when you think about Graham Harrell and what Coach Clay Helton are trying to lead us to believe, one of the 3 of them is telling slight truths, but our eyes tell us that there's something fundamentally wrong about the way that ball is coming out of his hands. Now, is it the yits? Is there some demons that he have to overcome? Only Kedon Slovis will know that. But all I know is that at the end of the game, when this team needs him most, he comes alive. But it's the 58 minutes before that 2-minute drive that I'm more concerned about. It's the consistency. And from your leader, you want him to be throwing with confidence and poise. And Erik, we're just not seeing enough of that to give you that type of confidence at the moment.
I like that he kind of kept going. I mean, clearly he sees the ball coming out of his hand. He knows that that's not what it's supposed to look like. And that was one of the things that stood out with him from the absolute get-go. When he enrolls early, some of the first passes that we were able to see, that ball comes out of his hand beautifully. I mean, he throws a terrific ball, and that's why it's been so striking to see this the last couple of games. And when Graham Harrell kind of says, hey, I think it got in his head, that's scary, I think, for an athlete. If that's something that you're talking about. You see, it's Major League Baseball second baseman, like you mentioned, with the yips and with kind of trying to figure out how to handle that mentally. I appreciate the fact that he finishes that game 12 of 12. He fought through it. He completed passes. He gave his guys a chance to make catches, and they did. And so I think you have to tip your cap a little bit to Kedon for fighting through that. Now, figuring out what it is going to be very interesting. Against Utah, that very first ball that he throws, there's going to be so much attention paid to that. And Kedon Slovis, he was very clear, I'm going to get it figured out. Clay Helton on Tuesday, he said, I don't think you'll ever see this again. Said they've been working on game balls already starting on Monday, and that during Monday's practice, Kedon threw the ball as pretty as he's ever seen it, according to Clay Helton. So again, maybe we're not talking about this after Utah, and it really was a one-off thing. but that is going to be kind of weighing heavily on a lot of people. And I think it changes a little bit how wide receivers maybe approach the game. If you don't know where the ball is going to go, can you be sort of as crisp in what you're doing and ready for the ball when you need it to be? Are you kind of looking around for where the ball is going to be? I think that's kind of an interesting thing to look at going forward too. But certainly the hope is that there was some kind of ball issue or whatever out there in Arizona, and they really can't just sort of tuck it away, move forward, and get things back on track against Utah, because you expect Kedon Slovis to kind of get into a rhythm and have these wide receivers working, and there were balls against Arizona that were there and fluttered or got held up or something, and it really did affect the offense when you're talking about how many points they could have put up against Arizona.
Yeah, but you brought up a lot of interesting points. And the first thing is what I think back to is athletes are creatures of habit. When you're healthy, you go through your mechanics the same way every time. You never want to have to be in a position where you have to think about it. Okay. But it was only when, as a defensive back at USC, when I sprained an ankle or, I had a lower body extremity that was injured, that I start favoring it. And perhaps I wasn't coming out of my plant the way that I normally would fire out. And once you're in your own head, it's kind of hard to get out when you're trying to overcompensate for something. Now, you mentioned as a receiver, your job is to be disciplined and trust that the ball will be where it's supposed to be. Because the moment that you start to deviate from that, that's when it becomes a problem. It becomes error in their process. And once there's a proverbial error in that process, you now allow for margin for error. So if I'm a defensive coordinator, maybe I go a lot more zone coverage against USC and force Kedon Slovis to have to hit those tight windows. Because if I have my players dropping back into coverage, I'm going to force you to be perfect until you prove otherwise. Maybe that's the strategy that we'll see more of moving forward, but expect Utah to force Kedon Slovis in this USC offense through offensive coordinator Graham Harrell to prove that it's not the Yits and that perhaps it was just a slick ball.
Yeah, that absolutely one of the major fascinating storylines going into this Utah USC game.